All right, guys. Hello, it's Dr. Green. I just wanted to put together a quick video lecture for the last section of, excuse me, of the series that we've been doing on the sections of on the sections of a research paper. Excuse me. So I wanted to go ahead and work through this last section with you guys. All right. All right. So the abstract. Okay. The abstract is actually a very important section, right, of any research manuscript. It is completely and totally separate, right, and should stand on its own, but it is nonetheless a vital part of any manuscript. So let's go ahead and just kind of chat about that. Okay. So what is the purpose of an abstract? What is it supposed to do? So the abstract is a brief summary of a research manuscript, right? So ultimately, whenever we try to include an in-depth analysis on a topic. Maybe it's a thesis we're writing. So for those of you that are going to be working on a master's, eventually, you may likely have to write a thesis. That will also require an abstract, right? And it's, when as a consumer of research myself, right, when I am looking at a study and deciding whether or not I want to read the manuscript itself, I will often take a look at the abstract to see exactly what it is that what was done in the study, what the purpose was, to give me an overview as the consumer, to help me decide whether or not I want to obviously continue to read the study or not, right? So clearly, that has benefits not just for not just for me, the reader, but also for other authors, because they can actually look at the manuscript, or at the abstract rather, to determine what how to what extent do they find this manuscript to be valuable and contributing to knowledge for a specific question, and will they potentially cite this manuscript? Often other authors will determine that via reading the abstract, right? So really important, right, that the abstract comes before the manuscript, right, the body of the paper, and this should be written as a completely separate document from the manuscript, right? So not something that is considered complementary, but it is a standalone document summary of your study that should be able to stand on its own, right? But typically is included, in a manuscript prior to the body of your study. So, abstracts, there are generally three types of abstracts. There's descriptive abstracts, informative abstracts, and critical abstracts. So a descriptive abstract provides information about a study, but it doesn't necessarily provide us data about results or conclusion, right? So it doesn't really draw conclusions about the information. It just kind of tells us what exactly was done in the study. We don't see those types of studies so often within healthcare and/or within the applied sciences like kinesiology or anything like that. Generally speaking, if we see those types of studies, they can be common in life sciences as well as humanities as well. Now, generally speaking, though, a descriptive abstract is typically going to be 100 words or fewer, so very, very short in length, right? Informative abstracts, on the other hand, provide all sections of a manuscript, including the results and conclusion. So purpose, the intro and methods, and then the results and conclusion. Generally speaking, the limit on an informative abstract is typically 300 words or fewer. And critical abstracts, lastly, provide information obviously on everything we've mentioned before. So purpose, intro, methods, results and conclusion, but also provide a level of analysis of the study in the abstract that talks about the reliability or validity of the study, and/or the completeness or contribution of the study to a body of knowledge. Okay, so let's just go through these sections, just section by section here. So obviously, in the introduction, we simply want to, simply and concisely answer the question: why was the study performed? So it's really important not to just restate the introduction that we've already written as a part of the body of our paper, right? But we need to really try to answer um, that question by stating our purpose and doing so concisely. In the event that there was a hypothesis that we are, concerned with in the study, or that in the event that we have hypothesized that, we'll experience X outcome, usually we should, in the introduction, provide and or state the hypothesis in the introduction to the abstract. So obviously, the body of your abstract. So the introduction, methods, results, and discussion. So the MRAD method, right, of writing a body of a manuscript, once again, should stand on its own, right? It should not only further substantiate the abstract that stands on its own, right, but it should also provide further information as well, right? The abstract does not provide. Very important to remember when we're writing an abstract that we need to avoid very lengthy sentences. Okay, we need to try to keep things brief and concise, and minimize the amount of wordiness and fluff that we're using. Okay, so the method section. So ultimately, what we're looking to do here is provide a very brief and concise summary and answer the question, what and how was the study conducted? So what was the design? What was the study design? What did we do? Was this an experimental design? Maybe it was. So in the paper that we've been working over in the past 2 weeks, this is definitely an experimental design, and we'll take a look at that abstract here in just a few slides to kind of critique that a little bit. So generally speaking, we're seeking to be very brief. Remember that in a typical abstract, we typically only have between 100 and 400 words in an abstract as a whole, right? So covering study design, what the variables were, and a brief summary of the subjects, right? So any detail that we want to go into about the methods section should be reserved for the paper itself and should be appropriately covered in the methods section. It's important to note that in the abstract, we're not including inclusion or exclusion criteria. That's not here, right? That's in the body of the paper. And any details about instrumentation, right? Those things can be readily handled in the body of the paper. It's very important to write this method section in past tense. Okay, the results section. So ultimately, the question we're answering here is, what did we find? Right. So the major findings, once again, should be expressed here very concisely. But we do so right here in the context of the purpose and hypothesis of the study. We're really seeking to answer 2 questions. Did we accomplish the purpose of the study that we set out to in the first place? And with that hypothesis, was that hypothesis supported or was it rejected, right? And so those are things that we are seeking to appropriately and concisely express in writing the results section of an abstract. So obviously, once again, we want to avoid using any filler wording, want to be concise and to the point, right? And present tense is appropriate when writing the results section of an abstract. Okay, the conclusion. So this is akin to the discussion section within the body of a manuscript, right? So we're answering the question, what does the data mean, or what is the impact of the study, right? Ultimately, we are simply seeking to provide a brief statement about the findings of the study that connects the purpose and the methods and the results together, right? So really ultimately looking to kind of restate the purpose, what we did, right, and what it is that we found, and simply what we can conclude about the study. It's very important to point out too that in the event that we think, right, that we have opened the door for future work, it's very important that we may want to add in just a quick sentence at the end of that conclusion section to say, implications for future research, might be X or Y, right? In the obviously, like we talked about on Thursday, or no, Tuesday. Today's Wednesday. I'm sorry. As we talked about on Tuesday, we talked about the possible clinical implications of the study that we've been working through over the Nordic hamstring study. And while the authors did not
they had a small sample size. They did point out that there were some things, some very clinically relevant information that practitioners might be able to use, right? So, and they pointed that out in the conclusion section of the body of their paper. And we'll take a look at the abstract here in a second. So it's important to write the conclusion section in present tense as well. Okay, really important though when you're submitting to a journal, right? Particularly when we talk about the abstract, we need to be very, we need to be kind of vigilant and pay attention, right? Because depending on, let's say you have a paper, right? And you submit that paper to 2 or 3 different journals, hoping that this is going to get published. But you know, the one thing that you need to know is that each journal may have different requirements regarding the word count, right? Regarding exactly what they want in the abstract. So both of these examples are from the author's guide for the Journal of Athletic Training, right? And obviously the first one up here is the original research. They're going to give us a maximum limit of 300 words within the abstract, okay? And they want us to talk about within the abstract, you know, the different subheadings of context, objective, design, setting. They want us to talk about the participants, okay, the main outcome measures, and then the results and conclusions. So, and obviously they've given us the option to discuss interventions and patients or other participants. And we'll see an example of that here in just a minute. So obviously, we know with the Journal of Athletic Training, also with systematic reviews or meta-analyses, we're again given a word limit of 300 words within the abstract. But if we pay close attention here, they are wanting to know what the objective of the systematic review was, right? What the data sources were, what the study selection was, data extraction, synthesis, and conclusions. Now, the reason for that clearly is when we're looking at original research, that is a primary source. Okay, that is something that is an original study, an experimental study conducted by a researcher. That is a primary source. Okay, as we've talked about previously in the class, systematic review or meta-analyses are very high levels of evidence if conducted appropriately. But they're secondary analyses, right? So they're analyses of primary sources and or previously conducted studies, right? So it's extremely important to lay out exactly how studies were selected and what the inclusion and exclusion criteria were, right? How the data was extracted, how it was synthesized, and the conclusions of that systematic review. So let's take a look at the example from our study that we've been working through, right? So here's an example of the abstract. So this was an original research study. So ultimately, they've gone in and covered every area, okay? And they have a word count of 300. That's what they're limited to. So they've given us a context, right? So they say the Nordic hamstring exercise, the NHE, is known to reduce hamstring injury risk in athletes, okay? It's a very, very simple statement that hopefully will catch the reader's eye, okay? So to optimize the NHE, they say, it's important to understand how acute resistance training variables influence its performance. All right, there's the context. So the objective, what do? They wanted to examine the effects of different interset rest intervals or ISRIs, right, on force indices during performance of the Nordic hamstring study. So we can also see with our methods, they've further broken them down. They've given us very quickly a 2-word description of their design. It was a crossover study performed in a laboratory. They gave us just their patients, okay, 10 well-trained young males, team sport athletes with a mean age, obviously height and weight as well, interventions, right, and then obviously our main outcome measures. So they've expressed the independent and dependent variables here. Obviously, dependent variables being peak force, average force, and percent maintenance, and percent decline, right? And also looking at inner limb force asymmetries. So here they've expressed the results as well, very, very concisely. And they obviously attempted to relate those obviously back to the objective of the study. So what did they give us here? They said there were no main effects were present between conditions or sets for any variables. However, okay, individual repetitions showed reductions in peak force. And they said over here in the objective to examine the effects of different interset rest intervals on force indices. So they gave us one sentence, right, about how that data affected the force indices. Okay, so obviously, once again,
here with the conclusion, right? They summarize their findings very, very quickly in relation to their objective and purpose. But what's the one thing they gave us, like we just talked about, right? They did say, they gave us one takeaway point. It says, nonetheless, practitioners should be aware of the potentially large decrements in peak force production that may occur within a set. And they gave us some keywords down here. So really quickly, just summing this up. So an appropriately structured and written abstract has a very, very big effect, like a drastic effect, right, on the perception and success of a manuscript. As we previously talked about, people that are reading journals and or authors that are looking for studies to cite, right, will utilize your abstract to determine whether or not A, they want to read your study, or B, whether they want to cite your study, right? So the abstract obviously, summarizes your study, but it also invites the reader to learn more by looking at your manuscript as a whole, right? So remember, the abstract should stand on its own as an independent document, as well as obviously the body of your paper of the manuscript should stand on its own as a document, but these are often included in the publication process as a whole, and one complements the other. So to finish up here, abstract has been kind of broken down into an acronym here for us. So AB, AB, absolutely, okay, STR, straightforward, ACT, abstract, ACT, actual data presentation and interpretation. That is essentially what we are trying to accomplish when writing an abstract. So guys, this PowerPoint's also up, but I wanted to go ahead and throw this narration out there as well. I hope this is helpful. Thanks, guys.